Hey, what's up? It's Jake from Nimbus DevOps, and we're going to get started with building some actual stuff on Kubernetes. And I'm going to be using the Kubernetes.io docs and tutorials. And before you get started, you need to make sure that you have minikube installed and control installed, and you've got Docker installed, and that it is running. If you're on a Mac or a PC, you can install Docker Desktop. If you're on Linux, you can install Docker Community Edition. But just make sure that you've got those things installed, and then you'll be able to go through this and follow along. So I found a tutorial on Minikube that shows how to run a sample app on Kubernetes using Minikube and Kata. This is a free in-browser Kubernetes environment. So let's go ahead and get this started. So we're going to deploy a sample app, run the app, and then view some logs. So instead of launching this terminal, which it has me do here, I'm going to try to do this in my VS Code on my local computer and see if this works right out of the gate. So now that I have Docker running, I can say minikube start, and having Docker running is a requirement. And it says the container is missing, so it's going to create the Docker minikube container. And we're just going to open the dashboard by typing in minikube dashboard. So as soon as this is completed, then I'll go ahead and do that. This environment already has all the prerequisites installed, so I'm assuming that this will just work out of the gate. So we're just waiting for this Docker container to get created. And basically the whole point of this video is we're going to take the theory and we're going to start trying to just build stuff and then apply what we learned to understand what was built and how everything is connected. So yeah, I think we're just about done. Cool. So now if I do minikube dashboard, let's see what happens. Remember, I have not installed any other prerequisites other than minikube and Docker, and then the kube control or kubectl library to be able to run those commands. So we'll see what happens. It says it's launching a proxy. Not exactly sure where this is going to launch, but it should say. So the Kata environment only, it says at the top of the terminal pane, click the plus sign and select port to view on host 1, and then type 30,000 and then click display port. So there may be some things that I need to do on my side in order to make this happen, but we'll see. But so far this looks like it works. So I'm going to go ahead and just be happy with that. Since I'm not in this other environment, I don't know that I need to do this because it launched it in my browser automatically, and it's on a different port, but we'll see what happens. At the top of the terminal pane, include a plus sign, select port to view on. Yeah, we'll see. It may have installed some prerequisite stuff, which is why we're not seeing the Kata. So anyways, let's check out this note. It says the dashboard command enables the dashboard add-on and it opens the proxy in the default web browser. You can create Kubernetes resources on the dashboard, such as deployment and service. If you are running in an environment as root, see Open Dashboard with URL. By default, the dashboard is only accessible from within the internal Kubernetes virtual network, and the dashboard command creates a temporary proxy to make the dashboard accessible from outside the Kubernetes virtual network. To stop the proxy, run Control-C to exit the process. After the command exits, the dashboard remains running in the Kubernetes cluster. You can run the dashboard command again to create another proxy to access the dashboard. And I don't have anything super important, but you can see that this is still open, right? This pipe is open. And it says that you can stop the proxy. The dashboard will remain running in the Kubernetes cluster, and you can run it again to create it. So if I hit Control-C, then what happens? Let's come here and hit refresh, and it says it can't be reached. So let's go ahead and close that, and let's open up another proxy. And it's very fast because the add-on's already installed now. So open dashboard with URL. If you don't want to open a web browser, run the dashboard command with -URL to emit a URL. Okay, so if I created another one, let's do it this way, and it should spit out a URL. Is that what I'm understanding? Let's see what happens. If you don't want to open a browser, run the dashboard command with the -- URL flag to emit a URL. So I'd assume this gives me a URL. I'll close that up. And it tells you it's opening and then it gives you a URL. You can control click this to open it. So I don't know that we really need that. Let's try it without. It's really struggling with that. So I'm just going to launch another proxy. Yeah, and that's no problem. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and create a deployment. So the Kubernetes pod, as we talked about before, is a group of one or more containers tied together for the purpose of administering and networking. The pod in this tutorial has only one container. The Kubernetes deployment checks on the health of your pod and restarts the pod's container if it terminates. Deployments are the recommended way to manage the creation and scaling of pods. So we are going to create a deployment now that runs a container based on this Docker image. So we're just going to say kube control create deployment hello world and then use this image. So I'm just going to open another window here and we create a deployment, and I can use kube control get deployments, and this will show me my deployments. I have a hello node, one is ready, one to update, one available. So going kind of zooming out a little bit and then going back in, if we run kube control and then get nodes, we can see that my computer only has one node, has a minikube node. That's where my control plane lives. That's my master node. And if I run kube control get pods, we can see the pods that are running, which in this case I have one pod. And in that pod, I can look at my deployments, which is what we saw up here. So that's it. Now if I come in here, we can see that I have in my workloads, I can see the status of my deployment, my pod. I don't have a replica, but I have one and it's running, and I can see all of that right here. So this is a nice little dashboard to visualize that. You can click around in here and look at, I don't have any cron jobs or daemon sets. I do have one deployment, so we can look at that here. And there are some options to scale to create more pods. You can edit it, you can restart a pod, you can go to jobs. We don't have anything in here. Look at our actual pod, and in the pod we can get logs, we can execute commands on the container that's in the pod, and we can edit or delete this pod. We can look at our replica sets. Right now there's only one. I could scale this out. I can get the logs, I can edit it, just delete it, and we can look at, we don't have a replication controller, nor do we have a stateful set. So for now, we'll just look at the workloads section. That should be good enough. Okay, so I've created this hello node. Now we want to view the deployment, which I already kind of did, but we'll go in order here. So let's do get deployments, and we can see we have a hello node deployment. And then we want view the pod, which we did. And then we can look at cluster events as well. So let's get events and see there was a schedule and it assigned this to minikube to the node, and then it pulled down this image. It was successful. It created a container. It started the container. It created the pod. It set up a replica set. And then this is like all my old stuff. So there's like all these events. And if we look at most recently, you see this was 88 minutes ago. 6 minutes ago, this would be, we started the kubelet, right? So I started Kubernetes. And then we registered the node, the minikube controller. So there you go. So if we want to look at the configuration, we can do kube control config view. And this is a YAML style output that shows you your API version, the clusters that you're on, what server you're running on, and the port. And then the contexts will show you all of the info on the minikube that I have, because that's the cluster that I'm using. And any users, in this case, I have a minikube user, stuff like that. So that's my configuration. So the next thing we can do is create a service. And it says by default, the pod is only accessible by its internal IP address within the Kubernetes cluster. To make the Hello Node container accessible from outside the Kubernetes virtual network, you have to expose the pod as a Kubernetes service. Okay, so it's good to know. You can have a pod running with a container inside of it, and that's all fine and great, but that's all internal to Kubernetes. So in order to expose services, right, so that's key, you'll hear that a lot. In order to expose services, you have to expose the pod as a service. So you can see here, you're going to kube control expose, and then you're going to pick your deployment, and then say what type, and then pass it a port. So let's go ahead and try this now. So we're going to do this guy, and we said now we have a service. So if I go back in here, I should be able to see if I have any services running. So let's check out our workloads. Deployments, pods, replica sets. I've got my pod, my set, and then I look at my service, and I can see I have Kubernetes service, and then I have this other service, Hello Node. So if I look at ingress, there's nothing. For services, I see in Hello Node that it's yellow, right? And you can edit, delete, whatever. If I click on it, what happens? So I can see it, I have a Hello Node service that lives in the default namespace. It's got a live updating age, a UUID, when it was created. It's using a load balancer, and here's my cluster IP. It does not use any session affinity. My selector, here are my endpoints, and what node it's running on, and then what pod it's in, and then my events as well. So that's pretty useful. This is a nice little way to see things. A lot of people run everything from the command line, which is super good to know. And you should know all the commands for any application or service that you're learning. But having this all here is kind of nice because you might not have known, oh, there's an endpoint. Like, what's the command to find the endpoint? So sometimes having these UIs are really nice. Plus, a lot of companies use this because it's great if you know how to do everything, but you want to be able to have this, make this information readily available to everyone. So we expose the pod. It's still yellow, but let's check out why in a minute. So the type load balancer flag indicates you want to expose your service outside of the cluster. The app code inside the image only listens to on port 8080. So if you use this expose command and expose a different port, it's not going to work. So it's kind of like Docker port forwarding, right? Let's view the service. Kube control get services. And we can see here I have my Kubernetes service running cluster IP, and I have Hello Node running on a load balancer. There's pending an external IP. I'm not sure if this will actually work on my machine, but we'll find out. We can see here that it also says pending. So it says on cloud providers that support load balancers, an external IP address would be provisioned to access the service. On Minikube, the load balancer type makes the service accessible through Minikube service command. So we can go ahead and run this command since we're not running in the cloud. Minikube service hello node. It's starting a tunnel, and now I have an IP. So since I'm not doing this in the cloud, I need to get an IP, so that was pending. But now this IP has been assigned, and I have a port. So we'll see what happens while this says it's loading. So this is for this other environment, which we still don't have. It's a good thing we're doing this on my computer because this takes an awfully long time to set up. So now we have some add-ons. The minikube tool includes a set of built-on add-ons that have to be enabled, disabled, whatever in the local Kubernetes environment. So let's go ahead and see what we have. So let's get the list. Let's do, because using Doctrine, the terminal needs to be open to run it. That's fine. We'll just open another terminal. All right, so here's all of our add-ons that we have, and we can see which ones are enabled and which ones are disabled. And after we get that list, it says we want to enable the metrics server. So let's find that. You can see it's disabled here, and it's created by Kubernetes. And it shows you whose managing all of this. So let's go ahead and enable the metrics server. And I have now enabled the metrics server. So if we go to the list again, we can look at metrics server and see it is in fact enabled. And that nice green check mark there helps. Metrics server add-on is enabled, which is exactly what we got. So now we can view the pod and service we created by saying kubectl get pod comma service. So it's a little tuple, and then the name for kube system. So here's the pod and the service. So here's our pods, they're running. We've got services. You can see the cluster IP, the ports, etc., the age, and that looks fine. And then we can disable, apparently, the metrics server and see what that does inside of here. So if I refresh this, is there a metrics place on here? Maybe, maybe not. It's probably in the logs. So let's check this out. So if we have a pod, and I go in this pod, and I can see in here that this is running, what kind of, so we have our events. That seems to be working. Okay, cool. So that seems like it'll work. This is not working. And this may be just because of my local network, which is why I was trying it on my computer versus just in this virtual environment to see what works and what doesn't work. The Kata Coda, I didn't even get to that. So let's go ahead and disable this metrics server. It is now disabled. And then we can go ahead and clean up. So first we're going to delete our service, kubectl delete service, and then hello node. And it's been deleted. And then we can delete our deployment. And we delete the deployment, and that's now been deleted. And we can also stop this minikube virtual machine and then delete the VM as well, which I'll probably do after that's powering off. So we can see here that this is no longer going to be needed, so I can control C out of that. I can control C out of my proxy. We can delete that, which means we can close our dashboard. We can close this guy, and that's stopped. So now we're just going to do minikube delete, and it's going to delete the container, all that stuff, and then we should be all removed all traces of the minikube cluster. So there you go. So now if I do minikube get nodes, I can see get nodes. Minikube get nodes. What did I do wrong? Am I going crazy? Let's look at this here. Is this already started? Well, there you go. Probably needs to start. Okay, so there's a little overview. This is still provisioning, but we managed to get through it all. So if you have any questions, let me know. If not, I'll put a link to this tutorial in the description and you can go try it yourself.